All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 21st of May, 2025, and this is the Cluster API office hours. Cluster API is a sub-project of Kubernetes SIGs, and as such, we follow their meeting guidelines, which can basically be summarized as please treat everyone as you would expect to be treated, or explicitly so, please be kind to each other. And if you'd like to talk, please raise your hand and I will call on you. At the beginning of our meetings, we like to take a little time to allow new community members to introduce themselves or say hi. So if that sounds like you, I will be quiet for a moment and please feel free to unmute yourself and say hello to everyone. All right, I am not seeing anyone unmuting, so presumably everybody here has already done that, what they wanted. Okay, let's look at the open proposal readouts. I think we just have, we've got the auto scaling from 0, which I don't think Alessandro is here for. And then so no update on that one. And then the chained and efficient upgrades for clusters with managed topologies. Is someone here to talk about that one?
So I know that Alessandro pinged me or pinged his Slack for the autoscale for 0.
Oh, cool.
I have to look into the last open comments, but we are scrambling to get the first alpha out. So yeah, I will do as soon as possible. With regard to chained upgrade, it is fairly new. It is out from 1 week. I don't think that no one started to take a look. Maybe Stefan and Christian made the first pass. So yeah, it would be nice if someone start looking into it.
Very cool. Yeah, I remember seeing this issue. It sounds like an interesting issue to get involved in. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Okay, let's go into our regular discussion topics. So Stefan, you're up first. You would like to go ahead and drop the MD revision management feature. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so basically I brought this up roughly, let's say 10 months ago. Why I think it's not very useful, why we should get rid of it. We discussed in office hours, nobody was against it. That's why we deprecated it in 1.8. Now we are in basically 1.11. And you have the chance of the API version bump to get rid of the feature. So basically, just want to bring this up again if now someone has a problem with us dropping that feature. I would probably defer to the details in that issue, except someone wants to discuss it again in detail. I can provide more context. Let me try it on a high level. So what the feature on a high level is basically that when a machine deployment gets updated multiple times, it will keep a history of machine sets around. And the revision management feature is basically that you configure the amount of machine sets that are kept around. And then there is a corresponding feature in Cluster Cuddle, which basically you can say, oh, let's roll back to this revision. And what Cluster Cuddle is doing, it reads the old spec of the machine set and copies it over the machine deployment. So that's all there is. Why we don't really like it is because it doesn't seem very safe. It doesn't work with a bunch of stuff. It seems barely used. The Cluster Cuddle commands have been alpha since I don't know how many years, basically since they exist, and there's no movement there. And also, yeah, I mean, you can do this with machine deployments, but you can do this with any other part of the cluster, right? So you can basically roll back your machine deployments if you want, but that's the only place where you can do it. So I'm not sure if it's like a sustainable approach to try to manage your cluster manually, make whatever changes you want, and the only place where you can roll back of Cluster Cuddle is like the machine deployment. So I think what people usually should do is whatever they apply, they should store it somewhere, maybe Git, whatever. And then they know what they applied in the past, and then they can also like apply old stuff again if they want, but not just by running Cluster Cuddle alpha rollback 15. And then it copies an old machine set over the current machine deployment, and everyone hopes that it just works. So there's also a bunch of stuff around like what happens during Kubernetes upgrades and rollbacks which are not supported, and a ton of other stuff. There was a recent question. I tried to answer it. I did not get any further feedback, but I also wouldn't block us by that. to be honest. My point of view is basically last time nobody had a problem with it. If now also nobody has good reasons to keep it, I would get rid of it. If then people complain after 1 year of deprecation and all of this, we can still consider reintroducing it if we really have a good reason to do it. But basically now's the chance. I don't know when we get a next chance. It could be another 1, 2, 3, 4 years until we do a next API version. Yeah. One reason why I want to get rid of it is basically a bit of maintenance and API service here. So it's not that much code that we get rid of it, but we just have a lot less stuff to worry about that we basically have to keep this thing working. That was a problem in the past when we implemented some of our in-place rollout aspects of machine deployment machine set. Basically, you can propagate labels, annotations, timeouts down to from machine deployment to machine sets to machines without a rollout. There was already a big concern there. How does this affect the history? I would expect that we run into the same situation when we do the actual full in-place rollout, just maybe even worse. So I just don't think like going through all of that trouble is worth it for that feature. Maybe one important thing to mention. Sorry, and
No, go ahead.
So behavior-wise, basically, what I imagine is that basically cluster API in the future will behave like it would behave if you set revision history limit to 0 today, which basically means you can update the machine deployment as often as you want. The machine deployment controller will still take care of getting rid of old machine sets with 0 replicas. So it's not suddenly like a problem of the user that they have to clean up machine sets manually. It's just that out of the box and always machine deployment won't preserve old machine sets. It will only preserve them as long as they still have replicas, which is already the way today. Today, it's just that it also preserves machine sets without any replicas, depending on how many you wanted to keep, depending on which value you set the revision history limit field on the machine deployment. But that field is going away, and basically it will be locked to 0. Okay, I think that's all I had.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, I think you've made a good case for it here. I can't say that I understand all the ins and outs intimately, but I haven't really looked at this. But I think you made a good case for it. And yeah, after a year of deprecation, if we can't remove it now, then, are we ever going to remove it? So, yeah, I would say I agree with what Fabrizio said in chat here, like, +1 to kind of keep going. And, we've given lots of warnings about this. So maybe, I don't know, maybe send in another email just to let people know we're going to take it out or something. But yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any objections really. Does anyone have questions or comments or objections about what Stefan is proposing here? Yeah, Fabrizio, please.
So we did, I think that we did all possible to gather feedback. We are talking about an alpha feature, an alpha command in cluster API, which no one ever asked to graduate. So the question is slightly different. Is there someone that care about this feature? Is there someone that use it?
Is there someone that knew it before today? Sorry, just joking a bit.
So because yeah, at a certain point, so we see more risk than benefit. It is we have to take care of it, and looks like no one is using it. Means
Hey, I agree with that. So, like, if anything, this was just added like in 2017 or something, because it was already available in deployment. But deployment has a reason to stay there because the spec of the entire pod is on the deployment itself. But here, the spec is in the bootstrap and infrastructure config, and we already do a lot of like, deployments v1, but we do a lot of like the the template management and whatnot out of band. So I'd say like mine is not a +1, it's like a +100. Like do it now, do it fast, right? Because it really doesn't really bring any benefits. Like we've been using deployments like at scale at this point, and we never use this feature like at all. If anything, it causes more trouble than it works for.
Okay, so it seems like you've got, Stefan, you've got violent agreement here to just remove it. And if people show up and complain, then we'll probably hear some good user stories at that point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, if someone comes around with really good reasons, it's not impossible to revert.
Well,
They're
right,
really
but it sounds like
convincing.
if someone comes around with a really good reason now, the first question is going to be, where were you for the last, several years or whatever, right? Okay.
I'd say
So
so. Just one more thought there, right?
yeah,
It's like
please.
if somebody comes around and like the only good reason that they might have is like for rollbacks, right? And I'd say like a good answer there is like to steer them towards using either other things like cluster class, right? Like higher level abstractions, or build the abstraction outside, because rollbacks, like even in this context, don't work as you would expect. Like because it might be like a change that you should not be doing. Like if your control plane has already upgraded and you roll back, right? It's like you may be out of skew. So there is actually good reasons to steer users that might be using this towards like completely different like path.
Makes sense to me. Thank you, Vince. Okay, so the consensus, at least as far as this meeting goes, is keep going, Stefan, and we'll hear about it in the mailing list or whatever if people have complaints about it. Okay, we'll move on to the next topic then. Ricardo talking about introducing distribution version field. So please, Ricardo, take it away.
Hello. So some times ago, I opened an issue about this, about introducing a new version field to represent distribution version. As within cluster API, the version field there are a lot of assumption that is actual Kubernetes version, and it makes it really difficult, at least for OpenShift and OKD, to drive upgrades and installation with the Kubernetes version. In the pull request linked in this issue, there was some discussion from the community, and it seems that open to further discussion. But it seems like with the issue, it didn't go forward. So I wanted to ask what's the best path to discuss about this and to bring it forward.
I guess the first step coming here is a good step. Does anybody have thoughts about this, or does anybody have comments on it? I guess my question would be did you made a PR for it as well, right?
It was a documentation PR, but then the opinion was it was too big of a change, and so we switched into another proposal. So the discussion started from the PR, and we moved to an issue to discuss it further. There are a lot of implications. I understand it's not an easy change. So yeah, I wanted to understand what's the best forum to discuss this. Shall I make I don't know, an enhancement proposal or something like that and discuss into details?
That was going to be my suggestion next. If there's no objections to going forward with this and no one has commented on this, I would almost say, yeah, start writing a draft enhancement to get more, just to spell out concretely what the changes are and that you'd like to bring this enhancement to the project. And then we can have, I guess, I would hope that if you put a PR up for the enhancement, we'll have an in-depth discussion there. I don't know if any of the kind of project maintainers want to chime in here. Yeah, Vince, please.
This is pretty interesting. The only question I had is while reading this, right? Like I as a user, like the dynamic of a copy, like what it does, right? It's like a sort of like what I think it's missing is the actual use case and how you would use it. Because I see like if distribution is present, the status variable should be populated, but it really doesn't tell me why you're doing this, right? It's like and why we should be introducing this. And the other thing that I would comment is distribution version and version are very confusing next to each other. So we need to be careful and like because yes, it's on the surface it's one other field, but I would actually put Stefan Fabrizio on the spot a little bit. Like, what do you all think?
To be honest, just reading the sentence, the new field and the current spec version would be mutually exclusive. I think that alone breaks like half of cluster API, right? Because version is so central to everything that we do. So I would really like to see like a very extensive proposal, like figuring out what impact all of this has on like everything in cluster API, because I think it's pretty fundamental.
Which that's why I was asking the question. It's like, what is the problem you're trying to solve with this specifically? Like, and I don't know the history of the other thing.
So, writing a bootstrap provider for OpenShift and OKD, bootstrap and control plane providers, and the user, when they want to install a version, they will like to specify OpenShift version and not Kubernetes version, and same for upgrades. And because there is not one-to-one mapping with Kubernetes version, it's not easy to do it with a Kubernetes version. Actually, it's actually impossible for some scenarios. So we need a way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, what it means for us, for example, we cannot use the Kubernetes. So if we have that new version field instead of the other version field, we cannot have any Kubernetes version dependent, any Kubernetes version dependent logic in cluster API anywhere, right? Which is like
In the
that
issue,
doesn't work.
I mentioned that we should move it to the status because we know once we have the OpenShift version, we know what's the Kubernetes version underlying the OpenShift version, but we cannot know the other way around. We cannot derive an OpenShift version from the Kubernetes version. So we can have it in status, for example, or some other way, but we cannot know it beforehand.
Which also means that basically every controller has to wait for other controllers to reconcile the status before it can actually know what the version is, right? While today we can just grab it from status and use from spec and use it.
Yeah.
I just want to note we have a couple hands up too, so I'd like to.
Yeah, sorry.
Lubomir, please.
I'm also trying to understand, is it something that if you change, like who is the person that is changing the field? Is your user? And if they change the field, do you expect a copy controller to do reconciliation, or is it an OpenShift additional controller that is going to do it?
And this would be on Bootstrap provider resources and on control plane resources. And so I don't know if it will extend. It will probably extend to also machine deployments. Again, we need to find a way to. I mean, this is a bit more complicated than this for other reasons, but I don't want to bring them in. But yeah, we need to find a solution that we will need some hook or something to handle differently the distributions.
Yeah, Ricardo, the question there though is like, is the expectation that there will be a cluster API controller that reacts to distribution version, or is that a third party tool that would react to the distribution version?
Yeah, I was trying to say it must be third-party tools because I think we cannot put this logic inside the generic cluster API controller.
Right. This is more informational for someone who packages a distribution. This would be a value that they would use to help monitor what's going on with their.
It's mainly used for driving upgrades and installation for the right version.
Right.
Okay, so can I assume that today the same third-party mechanism can use a annotation on the same object?
Yeah.
Okay, I see. That was my question. I think there's potential here to introduce a new field that only one distribution is going to use, and unless there is a rallying from the rest of the providers and distributions that they are going to say, hey, we want this field to be added, then I would say it's probably going to be better to keep it as an annotation downstream. If the rest of the providers say, hey, this is really something that we need, and then probably we should be added. But this is my initial take. I don't have another question.
Christian, you've got your hand up.
Yep. Yeah, my thoughts go into the same direction. So the cluster spec version field is used by core copy controllers, and we use that information in the core copy controllers. So that one makes sense for me to have. The adding a distribution version field, which is not used by the core controllers, is for me questionable. Maybe a way to already use it today would be using cluster class, have a variable for the distribution version, and use patches to then set it correctly at your bootstrap object or your control plane object. That would maybe be a way to already do it today without the need of adding something to a core cluster API though. So yeah, just some thoughts on that.
And Vince?
Yeah, Christian's suggestions is something I was also about to point out. Like, for what it's worth, we have a concept of distribution as well, but we encode the distribution version on our side after the Kubernetes version as a build tag and whatnot. Okay? That works fantastic because you get best of both worlds, and we didn't have to add any new fields or annotations, which they might get out of sync and whatnot. So the same version will just carry on. So you could have v132.1 dash the OpenShift version, and that's your distribution.
Yes, but we don't know it beforehand, so
That sounds like a problem that y'all need to solve like we did, right? It's like, because it's the user that I'm worried about. Like when you say like now you have two versions and then you can't set one till they set the other. It's a backward incompatible change, like folks pointed out.
yes,
Yeah.
I mean I'm open to other solutions, of course, to this. One other issue that I have is that the contract for Bootstrap provider specify versions, and in my case, I cannot have it in spec. So, I mean, it's optional, fortunately, but maybe we should at least make it more generic in that sense.
So sorry, where does it specify the version?
I can't remember now. I'll look it up. I think it's optional in one of the two. I'll look it up.
I might be missing it, but I think there is no version in the Bootstrap contract. I mean, there's API version and some language around that, but nothing about a version field.
Yeah, to confirm this, the version is only in the control plane provider, not in the Bootstrap.
Okay, I was remembering the control plane then. I remember it was one of the two. Maybe my memory is tricking me, so.
Yeah, but I think that, so if I look back at the PR, the main issue is that in cluster API, there is plenty of code that assume that the version is a Kubernetes version. And for instance, when we have to choose if to do an upgrade, we look at the version. So, and instead you're coming up with something different. So you're telling, I don't know, just asking, looks like you can have two different OpenShift version with the same Kubernetes version. how can we how cluster API can figure it out if this is an upgrade or not? Same is I don't know. I have on top of mind the proposal for chained upgrade, but if you look at our end-to-end test, how we do end-to-end test, how we test version, so the entire code base is full of this assumption that version is a Kubernetes version. So there are, I think that the problem is, I got the problem, okay. I'm not entering into why of this decision, I guess historical or whatever, but if we want to move forward, I don't think that, it is a huge research work, look into the code base, figure it out if we can make things work without working with Kubernetes version. But I think this will be really hard, because I don't know, when you do upgrade, we have validation of and that tries to ensure you cannot break Kubernetes versions queue. How this is going to work? So there are all these assumptions that are made in the code base, how to convenience, how to help users, how to deal with kubeadmin changes, how to have a CI signal that will allow us to certify that we work with a Kubernetes version or not. So the next step is there a way forward to dismount all this assumption? Or another angle, and then I shut down because I see other folk, is maybe I'm wrong, but as far as I remember, in OpenShift, you are not using entirely cluster API. You are not using cluster, you're using only machine set and machine, etc., etc. I don't know if this is still true, but maybe that scoping down what we are discussing could help.
No, it's not that. So it's a true CAPI provider to install OpenShift through CAPI. It's not part of core OpenShift. It's something else. Just to give more context.
Okay, thank you for the context.
Stefan, you're up next.
Yeah, just two points that I mentioned. One point is the assumption that we know that the version is actually Kubernetes version. I think that came in handy in the past, and I think we need it going forward. Essentially, if you have that version available, we can use it to figure out like what are we actually talking with and use features accordingly, right? So if core Kubernetes introduces new features, like there was this discussion about node maintenance or whatever else they add, there's a need a way to say like, is this thing available or not? And by version being a Kubernetes version, it's super easy to add an if else. You have a bunch of those already. I'm not sure in which controllers exactly, but that's one reason how we profited from that in the past, and I would like to stay like able to adopt to this new stuff by actually knowing what we're talking about. The other thing is, I think on one side it's like a research effort to get like the current code base, to figure out all the consequences and figure out how to change it in some way to allow this new thing. But it's also an ongoing future maintenance burden, right? To keep like the current thing working plus however the other thing would be working. So it's also like something that a lot of maintainers should commit to, taking that maintenance burden up and keep it working going forward. I think it's not just how do we get it working once.
Just one closing thought for me, like I need to run another meeting, but I plus one what Stefan just said. Like I would also add, like if there is anything to improve, it's probably like that. Semver already allows us to like encapsulate a lot of things in these versions, and maybe we need to get better at that, so that like other providers like can ultimately like encode the information that they need in these versions, but we can still assume that the 132.3 whatever, right? Like it is ultimately like a Kubernetes version, and then it gets respected all the way through. So that's more like a conversation we'll need to have. But or like if you already have like a layer on top of it, I would suggest to start from there before and use annotations as other have suggested as well.
All right, Stefan, please.
I'm not saying it's necessarily a good idea, but just sharing some approaches that other people took. So, I mean, one option obviously is to put that information in some annotation and then, yeah, just do whatever you want with it. Another thing that could also work is basically that users are setting the version field, however they want to set it. And then you have like mutating webhook does whatever resolution you want. And then it puts like, I mean, right, you could have I'm not saying it's compatible with GitOps or anything. I mean, it's a bit tricky. But what you could do is that on client side, essentially users are setting the OpenShift version. And then they send it to a server. You have mutating webhook. The mutating webhook does the resolution from that OpenShift version to a version which basically has the proper Kubernetes version prefix plus whatever suffix you want. And that's what is actually ending up in etcd. The immediate problem you hit with GitOps is probably if you don't add any configuration that basically the YAML that you apply on client side is not the one that ends up in etcd. So it would just try to reapply. But at least for some tools, I know that you can basically say, yeah, write this field, but don't care if the server slightly changes it. So I don't know if that's in any way like a feasible approach, but I saw stuff like this being done. Usually I didn't necessarily like it, but yeah, it's another option to do this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like listening to all this, and I hate to recommend it because I know, like, Joel probably doesn't like to hear this, like from an API perspective. But yeah, like I guess Ricardo, like like, have you tried doing this like with annotations and whatnot? Was that a consideration?
So the thing is, as I was mentioning earlier, in our case, it's a bit more complicated because we don't drive upgrades with machine deployments because OpenShift it doesn't really do rolling upgrades, so we need to do in place. So for now, we're only using resources from the Bootstrap and control plane controller, which we control, and we just added the field. But it would be nice to have a complete working solution that can interact in all the way. For example, we have some users that would like to use the pre-flight check that uses a Kubernetes version, but we cannot set the version field because otherwise work. So we have a working solution with this distribution version field in our resources. We would like to find a native solution with Capi core project. We can of course change our solution to make it fit well. But yeah, that's the state we are in. So
I'm just thinking though, like right now there are metadata propagation rules for annotations and labels and whatnot, and it seems like you could craft an annotation that would get propagated all the way down to the node potentially. So you could have this information available. Maybe I mean I probably need to read your issue a little more in depth because I'm missing some part of it here, I think.
yes, but the thing is, I mentioned this because we don't need it right now apart from what I just mentioned. We potentially need it, but we don't really need it for our core feature in the Capi objects. So we are only using our resources, so we don't need annotation. Potentially, we could use annotation approach for the Capi resources going forward, but in our case, it's not key as we don't leverage fully the driving upgrades from the machine deployments.
Gotcha. So then, but like, do you drive upgrades per machine or something, or?
Well, we do it from control plane object because it must be a cluster version and not node version for OpenShift. But I guess we will also talk about that in the next meetings because it's something I would like to discuss as well.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe the best thing to do for now, for me at least, is to reread your issue so I have a better understanding of it for next time. Fabrizio,
Thanks.
please.
Maybe a silly question, but have you discussed this with Alberto and Joel, which are Cluster API maintainers?
Yes, with Joel more personally, Alberto was also involved in the initial discussion, linked in the agenda. But we didn't go into details.
I think that maybe using them to try to sort out some using their knowledge, leverage on their knowledge of both Cluster API and OpenShift will at least help you to figure it out or better understand what could be done. Because honestly, I struggle a little bit because I don't have, I only know half of the problem. So maybe that they can help because they know both. And
Yeah, I tend to agree with Fabrizio with that. Like, I'm not going to reach back here and grab my red hat, but like, I'm putting my red hat on for a moment. Like, yeah, Ricardo, like, I haven't been in these meetings with the cloud infra team, but like, yeah, maybe, talking with Joel and Theo and some of the other people who are, and I think, I don't know, is Nolan here as well, talking with some of the other people from the cloud infrastructure team might be a good place to start, to get wider discussion about this. I don't know if you've had those
Sure.
discussions already.
Yeah, we did have, of course,
Okay.
before coming here, but I wouldn't mind doing them again with wider audience as well, with the whole team, instead of just Joel. And
Cool.
maybe something more interesting can come from there. I will bring this, what we have commented today, so the objection there were, and maybe we can have something more acceptable to start from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say ping more of us internally at Red Hat and let's get like an internal meeting going and then maybe bring it back here, once we kind of polish it up a little bit. I noticed
Okay.
Joel is suspiciously quiet on this one.
Okay, anyway, thank you all for the feedback.
Yeah, thank you for bringing the topic, Ricardo. Okay, so next we'll move on. Chris, you've got some information about new releases.
Yep, we published 1.10.2 and 1.9.8 yesterday. And the biggest thing to note is that CAPI providers who are trying to implement 1.10 were hitting a bug. This is the second bug I think they hit that had a field that needed something in it that previously didn't. So that is fixed by 1.10.2. So if that was holding you back, you should be able to move forward now.
Awesome. Great to hear. Okay, and then lastly, we had a question and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Pankaj, posted in the meeting chat. Are you here, Pankaj? Are you able to present your topic? I saw that Christian responded to you.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you for the opportunity. So I've discussed this with Kappa providers community meeting as well, and the current model that CAPI and other providers follow is every machine controller is tightly coupled with the expectation that the control plane is provisioned with the same infra provider. I've seen GitHub issues in CAPI talking about having mixed provider clusters. So I just wanted to get an idea, like, what's the plan that we're looking forward to? I understand that the implementation details are provider specific, like they can choose to have mixed cluster, like control plane by cloud and nodes by on the on-prem infrastructure. So I just wanted to get that idea.
Yeah, well, I think so succinctly, and unfortunately, like as Christian was saying, like I don't think there are any plans currently in place to look into this issue. It's not something that has been brought up to the group before, and I don't think there's been a request for this use case. That said, the KubeMark provider currently mixes it mixes Docker machines and KubeMark machines. So that might be a point of inspiration if you wanted to look and see how another provider is doing it. And I see Fabrizio has his hand up as well. So please, Fabrizio.
Yeah, what I'm curious to understand is there a blocker for what are the blockers for this case? Because as far as I'm aware, there are no issue or limitation in cluster API that prevents mixed provider in the same cluster, but it is, let me say, a common practice when implementing provider that prevents this. So if there are issues in cluster API, I think this requires a type of discussion. If the issue is how provider are implemented, is that first of all, someone has to figure it out what is the guideline to allow mixed cluster, write them down, and then engage a provider to convince them that it is a work that they have to do.
Yeah, so I've tried this with mass provider. It's not the official one, but maintained by some startup. And I made the changes. I removed that dependency on the control plane being from the same infrastructure provider, and it works. I don't think CAPI blocks it in any way, but I'm gonna dive deeper into that and see if there is something that CAPI needs to do to make this possible.
Okay, so I think that, start moving from if you have some learning in your experiment, start writing them down, figure it out if we have to convert. It will be the natural next step, because the real point is, okay, what is the blocker for making this happen?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think so there is any. But yeah, go ahead, Elmer.
Well, no, like just to I kind of agree with what Fabrizio is saying, like, and also like, we have some examples of how this works already. So like, yeah, if you're trying it out and you're finding issues, those would be great issues to bring back to the cluster API repo and raise there and say, hey, I tried this and it didn't work for this reason. Like we don't necessarily have any plans to do this, but we also haven't implemented anything that prevents it. So really, it's more a question of, if users are trying this out, what are the problems that they're running into? So we'd like to hear, it sounds like you've got some good experience in this. Maybe we could hear from you, like what you're running into and, what problems need to be addressed there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think someone mentioned in the chat that the core CAPI controllers should not care, definitely, because at the end of the day, it's an infrastructure provider side logic, which binds it to a specific control plane.
Right.
So yeah, I think I'll try that out, and I'll find out if CAPI has any kind of limitations to achieve that, and
Cool.
then get back here.
Yeah, and look at the KubeMark provider too. Like, you'll see some examples in there, because KubeMark uses it uses Docker machines for the control plane, and then it uses KubeMark machines for the worker nodes. So you could look at that as an example of how this is done in one.
We'll do that.
All right, Christian, you've got your hand up, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think it's impossible to have at the end that every infra provider is compatible to get mixed with any other, because there are underlying dependencies like network connectivity, which has to work and which has to be built and set up. So yeah, but I guess it's a provider to provider decision at the end, and maybe it at the end needs some kind of additional or wrapper for multiple infra providers, like some infra cluster provider, which then sets up the whole network and the stuff on AWS and the stuff on the second infra provider. Yeah, but
yeah, I would think the networking would be like the worst part. It probably wouldn't be like the cluster API part. It'd be like, Stefan, you've got your hand up, please.
Yeah, I think most of it was already said before, but I think Yeah, I mean, first thing, I think if in core cluster API we make any assumptions about infra-cluster being from the same provider as infra machine, like in core copy or KCP or bootstrap provider, per default, I would probably consider this a bug, and then we have to look into it, what's actually happening. But my current take would be that should be all fine and work. So I think probably what it comes down to is on one side, what infra providers should not do, basically have explicit dependencies from, like, let's say the infra machine object to the infra cluster object, that they read some stuff from there or stuff like that. I think that's one part of, like, yeah, what has to be there for it to make work. And then probably, yeah, a list of other requirements that have to be fulfilled in a sense of, like, network connectivity and network connectivity. I don't know what else. I don't know if the proper approach would be to have some sort of wrapper thingy, or if it comes down to that essentially infra machine has to be able to contain all its configuration to be able to be created without any other objects there. But I think overall the best thing that we can probably end up with, like in core cluster API, in the sense of like our book or like the core project, is some sort of guidelines on what providers have to take care of so that they're in general compatible with running in a mixed mode like that. And like a list of a bunch of things that people have to take care of, like network connectivity. I'm not sure if there's like a technical solution to this problem in the sense of we implement a certain thing in core copy, and then there's another thing that every provider just implements exactly the same way, and then everything will just work. I don't know if something like that is theoretically possible, or if it just comes down to a bullet point list essentially of requirements that have to be there, and things that people should not do in infra providers to make it possible.
Fabrizio, you've got your hand.
Oh, here I am. I'm sorry. Yeah, one things that come to my mind about experimenting in this area. So the issue is not only cluster API, not only network. There are other components that you will need, like, for instance, cloud provider and CSI, and both of them are inherently, many of them are not designed to work in mixed cluster. For instance, having most of the CE of the cloud provider will take control of all the nodes in your cluster, not only the nodes that run on one infra, except of the other. So there could be also issue at that levels.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I think I'm exploring this in terms of more of a managed control plane. Like AWS has a hybrid nodes, Azure has Arc, and others also have similar kind of managed offering for hybrid nodes, where the control plane and the node bootstrapping is kind of made simpler for users. In that case, I think the CSI is taken care by the driver, whichever runs under the nodes. I agree that for the self-managed machines, control plane machines, this might be a problem, but I don't think so. That's something will be the use case in this scenario.
Yeah, I think even just bringing up the cloud controllers is like a great point here, because we've had people talk about this in SIG cloud provider as well. Like, how could you have a cluster that spans 2 cloud providers or more and have the cloud controllers running properly? Like that question has not been solved yet there. So I think there'd be a lot of extended things, and Fabrizio is kind of rightly, bringing this up. You could even imagine things like CSI is going to be interesting, so yeah.
Okay.
Stefan, I'm gonna take your last hand
Oh.
up on this, and then I think we should move on because we just have a couple minutes left here.
Yeah, I'll be quick. So if I understood you correctly, we're basically saying that in your scenario, multiple cloud controllers is not an issue, because basically all the stuff that a cloud controller manager would take care of is only on one infrastructure essentially. And the other infrastructure, doesn't have machines and stuff, so you don't actually need a cloud controller manager in that infrastructure as well. Right. Basically, if you have workers only in, only in AWS, then you only need AWS Cloud Controller Manager, and it doesn't really matter where like your other
That's right. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
the other infrastructure is, because you don't need a cloud controller manager for that, because there's nothing there that would need a cloud controller manager.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but
That's
the
why I said
problem,
like it's a managed control plane. So I'm not even thinking about cloud providers or anything.
Yeah. So basically, you only have machines in one cloud.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not in two. Yeah, but just something different than maybe some other things that other people were thinking about.
Yeah, my use case is more focused on the managed control plane in the cloud and machines on-prem infrastructure, maybe vSphere, MAS, any other provider that I'd use for that. That's the idea.
Makes it a bit simpler.
sounds good.
Yeah.
So we'll look for your issues when you start running into problems.
Definitely, Enrico. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you for
cool.
the time.
Yeah, thank you, Pankaj. All right, so moving on, Stefan, you've got a topic here about let's not merge this for another 1 to 2 days.
No. So basically, I brought it up last week, like moving all the APIs into one package, and I'm like, let's say 1 or 2 hours into this task, which is maybe already 50%, I don't know. And I realized that I'm basically touching like, I don't know, most of the repository. So what I'm asking for is, if possible, maybe let's just mostly not merge other stuff for 1 or 2 days, except if we clearly know that it's entirely orthogonal, because I really would like to not rebase this pull request, to not run into any problems. I hope I'm done until like at some point tomorrow or something. It's really very mechanical work, but it's just, I mean, I'm already at like 700, 600 files changed, and I have still 3 API groups to move. So this will be at least 1 or 1.5K files changed. Really annoying to rebase, really annoying to re-review.
All right, yeah, sounds like a good warning. And it looks like you're probably, I have a feeling, Fabrizio and yourself and Christian will be the ones merging things in the next few days. So yeah, I think you've got the right people here. Okay, and then Fabrizio, the 1.11 migration guide.
Yeah, talking about V1 Beta 2. So changes are piling up. I like how things are shaping out. So we started writing down the migration guide. And I think that, so first of all, if you are interested, start taking a look. Second is that there will be a moment down the line where provider will start bumping or testing the bump. I kindly ask everyone to provide feedback that help make this guide as nice as possible, so the next person that is going to bump Cluster API will have less problem.
Yeah, this looks really nice. Thank you for putting it together. Does anybody have questions or comments about this? Or about Stefan's topic too? I realized I moved over that pretty quickly. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going up or anything. So Fabrizio, thanks for putting together that migration guide. I'm sure I'll be looking at it as I try to get Carpenter and Kumark updated. All right, I think that brings us to the end of our meeting, unless anyone has a last minute ad hoc topic they'd like to bring up. Going once, going twice. All right, have a great week, everyone, and we will see you next time.